got a certain amount of freedom with this sort of work. A lot of it's very tedious, but it's not a work, it's not a job, it's a love and a life and a pleasure. And in the restoration work I'm doing, I believe that the glass in these old windows in the Garrison Church, the east window that is, are of the residue stock when the British lifted the tax off glass. It's creating all sorts of problems. It's so frail and everything else, there's so much breakage through it. You're losing the frame. Looks like it's going to come away pretty easy. Yep. The reason these windows need restoration usually is because of some structural weakness, which you look for first, then coming away from the reveals, the degree of natural deterioration, the amount of repairs that have been carried out over the years. You take all those points in consideration when you're reconstructing. The bad pieces there, bad break. You might lose a few of those pieces getting the panel out. So, in order to preserve all of those, we'll put this bit of tape across. Secure them in the panel. Just makes it harder to rematch the pieces when you get round to the hard work back at the studio there. When windows of this nature and value have to be removed, those precautions are well worthwhile taking. In this case, because there's no string border around the outside and the painted glass being of such a frail nature going straight into the stonework, it would have been too difficult to use and risky to use a hammer and chisel to loosen up the pointed work there. So I used a electric disc saw to release the hold of that reveal. And then subsequently lifted it out with a pointing chisel, very, very carefully, because the glass is of such a thin nature in there. After each panel has been removed, each section of the whole panel has been removed, take it back to the factory, of course, give it a bit of a clean up. But before I do that, I'll put a paper over the top of each and take a black wax rubbing to give me the full lead pattern of the entire panel. It saves all the guesswork later on. Rub the lead pattern onto the paper with a black wax called heel ball. That gives me the shape and size of each piece of glass, where it fits if any disturbance comes as I'm dismantling the panels. We'll put each panel into a caustic bath, fairly weak. It won't cause any problems to the paint, but it's aimed at loosening up the cement held inside the lead, which was the original sealing of the window, and makes it in turn easier to dismantle the window. Far less risk of breakage or any piece of glass in it. The panel is then hosed down and allowed to dry out a little bit. be put on the bench, and various tools to be used. I prefer a small pair of tin cutters, various pliers, sharp lead knife, small pointed knife, a few other things there. Dismantle the panel by stretching the lead away from the glass and gradually easing each piece of glass out. And these pieces of glass in turn are laid onto a more or less a waste piece of glass in their appropriate position. They'll be cleaned down around the edges. And the next stage will be inspecting all those pieces that have to be replaced, rematched, and you've checked the right shape of the original piece. Some minor adjustment may have to be made in size. It may be in pieces, there may be fragments missing. Well, what fragments are there are taped together with sellotape and checked back onto the cut line. And the glass rematching is quite a problem. A lot of rematching is a compromise. You have to get the nearest piece of glass you have in stock to match the original. You'd have to do tests of various stains and paints on the glass in the furnace to see how they react. A window of this quality, I think it's important to put your best work into it, so these little experiments to find the best are well worthwhile in the long run. So then when I've decided on what paints and what glass are most suitable, I'll go through the various procedures of matching the paint work, the trace work, and the stains and enamels on those pieces of glass to bring them as close as possible to the original pieces. I think we have round about between 300 and 400 patterns of glass. Forget about the colours, which gives us a hell of an advantage over anybody else. Well, we've got virtually 3 generations of glass here, residues, small pieces, admittedly. There's boxes and boxes everywhere here. A lot of time is consumed searching for the right piece. So you'll then lay your new piece of glass over the drawn line and scribe it round with this wheeled glass cutter. It's tapped around the shapes, broken off. Any fine points are taken off with the grazing pliers. In this case, it's much thicker glass than the original, so we don't have to worry about the risk of breakage here. This glass is roughly double the thickness of the original glass. going to give them a coat of paint. The oxide of the paint being mixed with gum arabic and water. And the next stage would be to fix these pieces of glass, what's left of the original piece, and the new pieces to the plate so that you have light coming through the plate. You're applying paint to the glass, a mat of paint, and then subsequently brushing the paint away, working from the light to the dark areas, which is the usual way of doing it. And you go through all these processes of adjusting it as near as possible to the original and gradually building up a layer of paint. And the next layer of paint applied to it would be mixed with oil and the paint oxides and the rest of it, with a fine layer over it, and then further painting would take place on that second layer. And fire that fairly lightly, strong enough to give transparency, and then I'll put it back on the easel and give it a final touch-up. When you put the trays of painted glass in, the paint has a dry surface to it, and as it fires, it starts to become shiny. Well, you do your firing, I do my firing by sight. See, glass fires at different temperatures, even though all pieces being equal thickness. Some are soft glass and some are hard glasses. So now with a gas furnace, you have a hot spot and cool spots in the tray. So if your judgment and knowledge is good enough of your glasses, then you put all the hard pieces in the hot areas in the tray and adjust the others accordingly. I don't know how anybody could learn this except by handling the glass and making mistakes over many years till you build up a intuition and acquired knowledge of all these sort of things. You can't write it down. A gas furnace goes to about 650 centigrade as the working heat. The trays have been preheated, dried out, all moisture out of them and everything else. Then they're one at a time placed up into the firing chamber. Where the artist in the first place may have done them in 1 or 2 firings, I might take 3 or 4 firings to get as near as possible. This lead process, this has been in the family for a long time. We prefer the old methods. This cast lead, which is formed in these castings about a foot long, they're fed into mills, producing the various sizes needed. The old lead that I use still retains a lot of the basic metals as it come out of the ground. It's not super refined like the modern lead. Those basic metals give it its long-lasting capacities. There's been checks done on medieval lead, and that's the fact they've found. It's lasted so well because of it hasn't been refined as much as the current lead, present-day lead. So I buy the oldest sheet lead I can get. Anything before 1920 is good. Anything before 1904 is very good. The earlier, the better. The next stage, when it comes through the mill, it's a bit twisted, of course. So it's put into a vice-like thing on the bench here and stretched. And in stretching, it becomes naturally stiffer and straighter. But it makes it easier to use and everything else. Next movement is to place a piece of 1/2 inch lead, as we call it here, forming the 2 angles. and then insert the first piece of glass into the lead being H in cross section. The glass is inserted into it, and then a piece of lead fitted to the appropriate size, and the next piece of glass fitted into that, and so on, right across the panel. Check for squareness and parallel lines, minor adjustments to the lead with the point of a knife. Then wax the joints with a flux, and I'm using 50-50 solder, and I'll solder all the joints together. Check it all over again, wipe excess wax off the joints, and do minor adjustments to the lead. Points might be folded down, that sort of thing, against the glass. Wax it and solder the other side. Give it a clean down. A lot of the life of lead lights depends on the quality of the cement you put into them. I do a fairly warm to hot mix of linseed oil putty, which is a proven thing over the centuries, to which I add various ingredients, no real hardeners, and it's brushed in a soft state. And it's very successful, this method of brushing it in. It gets right into the lead, quite often comes through and out the other side. It's put in, by the time it's cooled off, it's a bit firmer, and you strip it back with a pointed knife. It's not very sharp, and the whole panel's done this way. All the excess putty's taken off with this knife. Then it's brushed down, and it's coated with plaster Paris to remove oil stains and all the rest of it, and polish the lead up. So there's enough lead picked up to turn the lead black. The next stage after all this is just to give it a good look over, to tidy up any outstanding little bits of putty, and just a final inspection. If nothing stands out too much, then it's a good job. But if it did stand out too much, it wouldn't leave my studio. It would be done again and again till I got it near as possible to the original.